Let's take a look at some information and charts on NEO for Brave New Coin. So I last discussed NEO in August 2020, and since then it's migrated from whatever it used to be to a new testnet, we'll call it 3.0, that they had been hinting at and had a roadmap for quite some time. New website, nice smart looking redesign, and of course it's got to have all the buzzwords. It slices, it dices, it does everything better than everybody else, etc., etc. And if you are into the NEO ecosystem, I'm sure this stuff is important to you, but at the end of the day, it's an empty cathedral until something like ICOs or DeFi or dApps hit the scene, and then the network can't even scale, much like ETH. So it's the dirty little secret, of course, is that none of these chains can really scale, including BTC, including ETH, when the time comes. But that's likely a ways off for NEO. Nevertheless, they've done something that they said they were going to do, in that they have a testnet, 3.0 testnet, let's call it. And they go through and they say they've launched XYZ. And again, the second dirty little secret is, for most of these projects, none of this stuff really matters too much. Honestly, at the end of the day, I'll talk about technicals at the end, and I will lay out why I don't think any of this stuff really matters, which is why I'm more focused on technicals than fundamentals. In the first place, nobody really knows how to value any of this stuff anyway. There is a NEO Foundation. Their last financial report was on June 30th, 2020, so not super relevant to April 2021, but they do hold a substantial amount of BTC, or at least they did, and they likely still do, so they're sitting on a large treasure trove of money, and they're not going to disappear anytime soon. If we look at the on-chain stats through Coinmetrics, transaction count in the line here, average transaction values in the fill. Average transaction values have increased slightly, I guess. For the most part, they've just held flat since mid-2020, whereas transactions per day have kind of exploded. For NEO, it's holding somewhere around 250,000, which for NEO is a massive leap from where it was. Basically a 10x in on-chain transaction activity for whatever reason. If it's a 3.0 anticipation, if it's some sort of consensus mechanism, whatever it is, it's increasing. I still think it's just too early. They used to be ant shares before they were NEO, so they're in a bit of a fact-finding mission to figure out what they want to be and where they're at in this market. And I still think they're on their way. They're getting there. If you look at fees, they're basically non-existent for NEO, which makes the transaction data less interesting. If fees are zero, because it doesn't really value the transactions in any way, much like EOS and Ripple, and you can do something 10 million times Tron, call it a transaction, but it doesn't really cost anything. So it's basically amounts to spam. That's really the non-polite way of calling it spam. Active addresses have crept up slightly since January 2020, multi-year highs, I guess, and NVT, inverse metric of economic utility, in the line here is creeping up, which says that it has not adequately priced in market cap price-wise, and that it's overbought, essentially. You don't want to see a rising NVT if you're bullish. Definitely want to see a falling NVT. So this gives me caution more than anything, even with transactions rising and all that other stuff that I just discussed. To see NVT increasing is not bullish if it's increasing with price. And speaking of NEO price, I tried to think of something that Google Trends would make sense with. NEO price looks mildly adequate. There were highs in Google Trends in 2017, 2018. And then it just languished to nothing and recently increasing again. So not that much activity. This might look different if you look on like a Chinese search engine. I think it's Baidu, or non-Google searches are probably larger for NEO because it's not really a US focused centric project. All right, let's get to the fun stuff, the technicals. This is a 3-day chart on Bittrex. And for the most part, NEO had been held to what's called a Wyckoffean accumulation, or a Wyckoffean type of accumulation. Wyckoff was a guy who was an analyst, a TA person, and he recognized patterns like this repeating in markets over and over and over again. This particular pattern could be considered an accumulation pattern. I talked about it in August, which is the only reason why I even know to look for it here. But the expectation here with stuff like this, especially with a spring where you basically get a new low, a new multi-month low in this case, before the up move. This gives it the momentum to drive that V-shaped pattern to higher highs. But when this forms, baseline is, regardless of what's going on, we had Corona, right? Everything sold off, whatever, right? The white coffee and accumulations thing was still intact throughout all of that. And ever since March, it has just continued to increase kind of as expected based on white coffee and accumulation principles. So it has these accumulation phases and then it begins the markup phase. So it's currently in that markup phase and continues to be in that markup phase. And that holds a bullish continuation bias just until it's over. So take that for what you will if you are unsure on price here. I'm not a buyer up here, but I can understand why people would be. If we look at the half-year MA, this 183 line, the green line, and then 5 times that. If you know anything about my TA recently, I've looked a lot at these moving average multipliers. And depending on the coin and the data available, you have to adjust the average 183, 365, 730, half year, 1 year, 2 years are what I use. And on the 1 or half year, this does look pretty convincing as far as picking the tops and the bottoms, which is what you want in any indicator. You can see this long drawdown here, but nevertheless, buy zones are in the green, sell zones are in the red. So if we map that forward, we can say, okay, 150 is probably the high here. That'll keep increasing slightly over the next few months. So basically 2x from here is reasonable. If we change that slightly and look at the 365, it gives us a price target of around 110. Doesn't capture as much data, but it does capture the previous all-time high nicely. It captures the lows nicely. So all in all, I like 100 to 110, or sorry, 100 to 150. And the longer this goes, that target will move up over time slowly. But so 2x from here is reasonable, is what I'm trying to say, based on this data. Looking at the 3-day cloud on trend, now you don't necessarily want to use trend metrics if you're in a ranging market. If you're in a ranging market, just draw some lines and be done with it. You don't need to think about trend because you have a sell zone, you have a buy zone, and unless it's making this white coffee and accumulation pattern, it's pretty easy to just set it and forget it as far as sell here, buy here, that sort of thing. But even if we look at the cloud and we didn't know about white coffee and accumulation, we can say, all right, on the 3-day, zoomed way out, we are above, or we're above the cloud for the first time really since 2018, 2017, in late 2020. And we've held above that arguably the entire time to present. Even when we didn't, we get this TK cross recross, which is a bullish re-entry signal. So all this amounts to, yes, bulls are on the right side of this trade for sure. And here's the 50-200 cross, which was bullish since mid-2020. So there's plenty of reasons why this is doing what it's doing now, even though the project is, kind of whatever. It's an alt among many. It doesn't do DeFi well. It doesn't do dApps well. It doesn't even have a full-fledged network per se. But none of that really matters. Our 5-yearly pivot is less than 80, so I don't doubt that we're going to blow past that this year at this point. VPVR shows support between 25 to 40. I think the all-time high is 160, 150, somewhere around there. Maybe it's around closer to 200. It's harder to tell, but I certainly like a retest of all-time highs. I think everybody's looking for that at this point. One caution here is that you are getting a higher high in price on lower momentum. So there's the beginnings of a bear div at this point. For me, if I'm buying this, I'm buying it closer to this VPVR support than I am as it's breaking highs on a bear div. That's just me. Lastly, looking at the Neo BTC chart, this is the 200-day moving average, which has been a pretty good trend indicator as far as bullish or bearish. A little bit noisy in here, but all in all, it's mostly been bearish since 2018. Mostly stayed south of the 200-day moving average. This week, it's moved above the 200-day moving average. So just more reasons to pile on the bullishness here as BTC does a bunch of nothing at 60K. No bull div here, or bear div here just yet. So this looks good for more up, slowly. I don't know how much more it has in it necessarily this week. But everybody's watching BTC, especially when you're looking at BTC pairs, obviously. But the longer BTC can consolidate at 57, 58, 59K, that gives a chance for stuff like Neo BTC and XRP BTC and all this other junk to get rotated into before it's rotated out of and BTC moves again. There's definitely a leading lagging effect where people who are greedy stay in to stuff like Neo BTC when BTC is moving, and people who are smart rotate out of alts and into BTC. So that's also worth keeping in mind, that this trade setup may not look so clean if BTC breaks out. I do like, really a 2x from here is probably reasonable based on local highs. So all in all, it's anybody's guess what's going on with Neo under the hood at this point in time. I couldn't even tell you if their consensus is still Byzantine fault tolerance or some variation of that. But ultimately, the tech rules the day more so than even the on-chain stats. Even though Neo's been around and shares has been around for a long time at this point, it's still governed by the technicals, which on the USD chart look bullish, and on the BTC chart look bullish so long as BTC remains flat or sideways. So that's all I have for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe. Get us to 10K subscribers. Check out our fund on Enzyme, which is a non-custodial portfolio management tool. Currently, it's just an ETH and BTC fund. We will be launching a DeFi fund as well. You can check out all the trades, the deposits, the allocation of everything, AUM. It's all transparent. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and happy trading.